This is an article from The Independent about the recent terror attack in Pakistan. Obviously, we all condemn the attack and the attackers. I just wanted to make this video to object to the way that this has been reported in the media and to criticise this article and others like it. This article popped up to me on Facebook, and the caption that The Independent had put with it was one word: telling. And the title of the article is "The most deadly ISIS attack in weeks is the one we've heard least about." And that combination of titles makes a fair few implications and assertions that I take issue with. And the most obvious one to me, is that we Westerners, obviously, don't care about the victims of this attack because they're Muslim, and or because they're brown. And The Independent reinforce this sentiment here, just a little bit further down the article. There's a highlighted tweet here from Aisha Saeed. The number's up to 100, the death toll presumably, but they were Muslim, so no filters, no trending hashtags. And there are a few issues I take with that. Firstly, that the article goes on to show us the trending hashtags that are there in support of the victims of the attack in Sehwan, where the shrine is. So what the point of this juxtaposition is, I don't know. The second issue that I take with it is that people do care. People watching this video are probably already aware of this incident, and anybody that has certain subscriptions or viewing habits online will know about it. The news is international, it's online, we know what's going on. But the third thing is that people shouldn't make apologies for that anyway. The fact that this attack isn't on the headlines of Western media is not our fault. It's just a fact of life that the media has to cater for its own audience. A Western media caters for a Western audience, and an Asian or Middle Eastern media caters for its own audience. You're not telling me that the hashtags Pray for Paris and Pray for Nice were trending just as strongly in Asia and the Middle East as they were in Europe. Europeans care more about what happens on their doorstep than what happens in Pakistan, and Pakistanis care more about what happens on their doorstep than what happens in Europe. And besides, if the media had to report on every single jihadi attack that happened in the Muslim world, they'd never report on anything else. The second thing I want to come on to, which is the larger issue, is the way that this has been reported. This attack was committed by Muslims to other Muslims. Therefore, The Independent focuses on the fact that the victims are Muslims. And so, it can't have anything to do with religion. How can it? No, it just doesn't make sense. The top comment on this article made the same assertion, and it reads, "Why can't people understand that Muslims are not terrorists, as terrorism has no religion? This attack was on a holy place where Muslims pray. Do you think a terrorist, if you think is a Muslim, will attack such a place? I guess not." So Shiraz Bukhari makes this claim, as does the person underneath and lots of other top comments. But this is like, it's just like wrong.
That's just totally wrong. It's just like wrong.
It just demonstrates an ignorance of what is presumably the guy's own religion, considering his name and the nature of his defence. The fact of the matter is, the shrine that was attacked is a Sufi shrine, and although the Independent article does acknowledge this, it also goes to lengths to make sure that Sufism is lumped in with the two major sects of Islam, Sunni and Shia. It implies that it makes no difference, therefore it shouldn't matter that these people are Sufi. It's a form of Islam, and Sufi orders can be found in both Sunni and Shia groups, so it's Muslims on Muslims, it can't have anything to do with Islam, right? Wrong. Sufis make up a tiny minority of the Muslim community, and are considered heretical by the majority, and we know that the majority, about 90%, is Sunni. So this distinction, Sufism is a form of Islam rather than a sect, it just doesn't matter, it's nonsense. The fact of the matter is, there's a difference between Sunni and Sufi. Yeah, there might be some Sufis that identify as Sunni as well, but to ignore the distinction is completely dishonest, because hundreds of millions of Sunni Muslims think that Sufis are either full-blown infidels or hypocrites, which I'll get onto in a second. And this is where the Independent's ideas fall down, and where Muslim apologists' ideas fall down. The idea that Sufis, Sunnis, Shias, and other Muslim minority groups like Ahmadis, they're all Muslims, they all identify as Muslim, they're all one and the same, so there can't be any real religious motivation for them wanting to harm each other. This is totally incorrect, and should be obvious to anybody who's considered what religious sects do to each other. You know, think about Catholics and Protestants. The reason it's worse in the case of Islam and more widespread is because of the logical pathways provided by the Quran and the Hadith for Muslims to kill other Muslims based on certain criteria. And today, in the real world, that usually manifests itself as a member of the majority community, Sunnis, killing some member of a minority group such as Shias, Sufis and Ahmadis. And I'll talk about the two main pathways for that now, the two motivations that the Independent don't talk about and the people in the comment sections don't talk about, because it's more important to virtue signal than it is to talk about what's true or what the real motivations for these people are. And it's not as though I need to ascribe motivations to them, because they tell us themselves why they do what they do. So the most direct path in Islam to result in this kind of behaviour is to invoke the doctrine of takfir, which is to declare another Muslim an infidel. And when a Muslim leaves the faith, commits apostasy, we know that the punishment is death. This is agreed on by all the major Islamic schools of jurisprudence, and it's agreed upon by majorities of populations of numerous Muslim nations. Even if one makes the claim that it's illegitimate to call out a Sufi for apostasy because they were never a true Muslim in the first place and they're just an infidel, then firstly, there's plenty enough justification in the Quran and Hadith for killing infidels, and secondly, Muslims believe that everybody is born Muslim, so every infidel, in some sense, is an apostate. So a Sunni Muslim, or ISIS in this case, call out some section of the community, Sufis, for being not Muslim. They've committed apostasy. They deserve to be put to death. There's all the justification you need. You can go and kill them in this shrine, and you're fighting against unbelievers. You've got all the usual prizes, the jackpot of the virgins and all that kind of thing if you die while fighting for that cause. The second pathway, which is also heavily subscribed to, but it's slightly weaker and it doesn't necessarily result in murder, but it can, is to label Sufis and other minority Muslim groups as hypocrites instead. So rather than call them full-blown infidels you don't believe, the Quran makes a distinction for hypocrites and says that these are people that believe, as Muslims believe, in Allah and His Messenger, but they're not politicized enough. They don't support the theocracy. They don't support Sharia being imposed on all people. In the Quran, the hypocrites are sent to hell, and the true Muslims are also called upon to fight the hypocrites along with the unbelievers. So although there might not be a direct incitement to kill hypocrites at any given opportunity, clearly the tone is set. You know, if you've got a group of people in your scripture who repeatedly go to hell and who you are advised to fight against by your prophet and by your God, they're not the best liked people, you know. It's clear from the orthodox point of view that Sufis have to at least fall under the term hypocrite as defined by the Quran, because Sufis are more concerned with what happens after you die, the hereafter, and do not pursue political ends. They don't pursue imposing Sharia on others or imposing a theocracy like the Quran calls for. They simply aren't as concerned with the world in which they're actually living. And the stretch to deem them an infidel isn't that far, and it's evidently not that hard for a significant number of literalist or radical Sunnis to do. Obviously this is only one interpretation of Islam, and some people will disagree with it, although not as many as you'd hope. But it's a valid interpretation, and that's the important point. ISIS have a valid interpretation of Islam, and it's supported by hundreds of millions of Muslims around the world. Those hundreds of millions of Muslims aren't going round shooting people and blowing themselves up in crowds of people and cutting people's heads off, thankfully. But that doesn't mean they aren't a problem, because they support the same ideas, they support them politically, and they give the people who commit the acts of terror cover, ideologically and sometimes physically. It's the same reason some Muslim majority nations give financial assistance to ISIS, as we discovered through some of the WikiLeaks that have come out, despite the fact that some of these nations have had ISIS terror attacks committed against their own citizens. The reason is obvious when you observe the differences in beliefs that the perpetrators and the victims have, and then look at the source text which informs the perpetrators of what to do about that discrepancy of beliefs. The government, and some citizens of a country which has had attacks on its soil committed by ISIS, will still happily fund ISIS so long as the targets of the terror attack are approved of by that nation's government and citizens. That's the sad fact about the Muslim majority nations, And if you want to depress yourself a little bit more, just go and have a look at the Pew polling data for Muslim opinion around the world. I'll put a link in the description below. Just to wrap up, let's address the unfortunate irony of Muslim apologists and do-good liberals using the ISIS are not Muslim argument. Firstly, I think we've thoroughly debunked that argument. ISIS are Muslim, as we've already discussed. They have a valid interpretation. They call themselves Muslim and claim Islam as their inspiration and motivation. But the irony is that by using the ISIS are not Muslim argument, the apologists immediately accept the rules of the game that the jihadis have set. The apologists invoke the same doctrine of takfir that the jihadis do. This just reduces the debate down to whichever side shouts the loudest wins. You're not a real Muslim, I'm going to blow you up. Versus, you blew someone up, you're not a real Muslim. Not only does this support the narrative of the jihadi, it's also just a form of the no true Scotsman fallacy, which I'm sure we can all agree is a very weak argument.